session of the Speak Knowledge series at CMPL Expo 2026. This session is titled Owning the Narrative, Building Brands, Becoming the Brand. Attention can launch a brand, but authority is what builds an enterprise. Today's session examines how founders turn visibility into a scalable business, whether they began with an audience or built one along the way. It's a conversation about voice, identity, and what it truly takes to own the narrative of a brand in today's market. To lead this conversation, we have with us a remarkable lineup of women founders, investors, and brand builders. Moderating this session is a leader whose career has spanned the very best of consumer business and venture capital in India, with a background at Hindustan Unilever and Lightspeed India, and currently building her own venture in stealth. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for our moderator, Miss Kareena Chopra. Can we welcome him with a huge round of applause? Please give her a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Joining her on the panel, we have actress, entrepreneur, and founder of Starstruck, none other than Miss Sunny Leone. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause. Joining them, we have the founder of EDT and one of the most respected names in the women's wellness and motherhood space, Miss Naya Sagi. Can we welcome her with a huge round of applause? Joining them, the founding partner at Sixth Sense Ventures, one of India's leading consumer-focused venture capital firms, Miss Swati Mehra. A warm welcome to Swati. Our next panelist is co-founder and chief business officer at Bombay, the women's brand by Bombay Shaving Company, Miss Siddha Jain. A warm welcome to Siddha. And our last panelist, the founder of Gayatri and She the People, a leading voice for women in business and media, Miss Shaili Chopra. A warm welcome to Shaili. Kareena, over to you to take over the proceedings.
Hi, everyone. Good morning / afternoon. It's very nice to be here at the outset of my building journey with this panel of very accomplished founders. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. And happy to be having this conversation because I think there's a lot to learn from this lineup of founders with us. And so as we get into it, and because we're at CMPL, we know that the foundations of any great product lie in the brand and narrative as much as the product, the packaging. And there are many elements that come together from the story, the trust, the community, the founder presence. And that's the chat we're going to have today, which is owning the narrative, building the brand, and becoming the brand. So I'm going to kick this off with a question for any one of you to dive into, which is that in today's world where the founder is expected to be the operator, the creator, the storyteller, is that too many roles for one person to be playing? I'm happy for anyone to dive in.
First of all, good morning. And the answer, I think, is no. I think it's an obligation for us to wear many, many hats and do as much as we can throughout our day, because there's obviously not one person working in your company. There's so many different people, but to wear those many hats, I think, is important.
Can you hear me? Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. I agree with Sunny. I just think it's also a very strong competitive strategy. If you're a D2C brand and an insurgent brand, what you have going for you is a story of the why. Why did the founder build this company? What motivates him or her? And when you look at sort of the larger, almost like the Goliaths in the market, it is these stories that really resonate with the people you're actually out to serve as well. So I think it is an obligation for sure, but it's also a very strong competitive and strategic edge.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to Naya. And, you mentioned about Goliaths. I think as investors, we keep saying that entrepreneurship has never been more harder for founders, right? Because for out of every 100,000 businesses, literally only 1,500 succeed, which means that if back in the day, legacy brands could just ideate and there would be execution and operating done by a lot of the other team, founders today have the onus to really do all, right? And that's actually been the core differentiating factor, if I could say, for most businesses, even in the portfolios we've had, who've succeeded are the founders who've really been there and at least in the initial journey, right, have really taken on roles beyond just building strategy or storytelling, but operating at every count on the business.
Thank you.
Hi. I wanted to say that in many ways today, it's really important that you are the brand that you are trying to sell. People want to buy products that are truly believed to deliver, truly believed to stand for ethics. They want to buy products that stand for their generation, their conversation, their DMs, their Instagram. And I think it's wonderful that if we would have to speak for our own brand in a way because we just know our brand the best. So I genuinely think that storytelling is an idea that's not new. We finally have a hashtag for it. And as someone who's told stories for 30 years of her life, I think the fact that I can now talk about my brand without feeling that I'm doing just an excessive publicity, wow, that's lovely. I feel so proud to be able to speak about Gayatri and She the People on platforms like these. I think that's a very good shift. It may have added a bit of work, but I really think it is the same work, really.
Okay, amazing.
I think just one thing that storytelling helps in, it builds clarity. I think the most underrated fact of building something long term and that's a legacy is something that you can build with sheer clarity. And I think the more outward facing we are, the more questions we ask and the more deeply we think, that depth reflects in both the business and the stories we tell. So I think it's not even a necessity, but it's a way to sharpen your own skill set when you're building the business, at least for me.
Yeah. No, thanks. I think good one to kick it off and happy to hear that perspective from all of you. We are in the age of a two-way conversation because of the storytelling. There's lots of comments coming your way. There's a lot of consumer feedback. There's a lot of appreciation coming towards brands. So I'd love to understand, maybe Sunny, we can kick this off with you because beauty and personal care, makeup is such a high involvement category with such a high pace of innovation. I'd love to just ask maybe how you balance listening to the consumer with what you might have mapped out strategically for product.
Well, first of all, listening to our consumer is something that is extremely important because we need to hear what women want. What are those needs? What are those wants? And how do we accomplish that? So when we started Starshark, one of the main things that I wanted was, does she want to buy the lipstick again? Was it a great enough formula that makes them switch from one brand to another? And I think that was extremely important for us. And, we're so excited about everything that we create.
Okay. And Naya, question for you, since you're on a second building journey, and I think everyone knows about your first, and you've sort of now talked to a consumer in two very different contexts. Love to hear sort of how you take them on that journey with you, but also how you've had to evolve, let's say, the community and storytelling piece, given your two distinct building journeys.
Sure. So my first company was a company called Baby Chakra, which I'm assuming many of you are familiar with. And that was a very different journey. It was a consumer tech platform. We were doing machine learning, predictive algos when we didn't know we were doing that as well. But I think the reality of that was that it was, very personalized to each mother's experience across pregnancy, parenting, childcare, nutrition. And then, of course, the whole discovery and the recommendation of products on the back of which we launched our own private label, Baby Chakra, which became a sleeper hit. We got acquired, and that journey had an interesting outcome. My new company, EDT, which literally stands for Everyday Design and Technology, is very different. It is based on the thesis that we as consumers deserve better in the daily devices that service us in our lives across home, kitchen, and beauty. And in doing this, I have applied a consumer lens, but we don't have an app. We actually have a community we call the Edit. It's a play on EDT, which is a very curated community of design, tech, taste makers. And we build our products out with them. We do this on WhatsApp groups. We do this in person. We go to, industrial design labs where they hang out. We go to colleges where, you have like a plethora of tech students and we build like products out with them. It's a very, very different cohort and a very different approach where we're not like learning from just the data and the insights anymore. You don't have the luxury of having a back-end stack on the app. You actually seeing people in action, play with your products and learning from them. But we equally also, of course, go back to our target segment of moms and young parents and dads who are actually using our products to make their lives better, seeing how our products exist in their kitchens, in their homes, and in that real-life interaction, taking that feedback back. Just one thing to close off with, in my now almost 10 years of building communities, the only thing I caution my team about is that if you ask someone, on how to build, sometimes they might just say, build a faster horse. So you have to keep on taking that step back and say, how do you truly create 100x delta in the experience of the product you bring to market? And a lot of that is still gut intuition and just taking a bold bet.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. Shelly, I have to ask, because you have a large community, you have for a long time, and you're having such interesting conversations with them about topics that maybe aren't yet fully mainstream. And so I'd love to hear about, let's say, how you have the conversation and build comfort and trust with them while they are finding the language of expression for some of these areas and problems.
Yeah, that's a great question. So across She the People and Gayatri, we have close to 6.5 million women who are part of our network. And Gayatri is specifically focused on menopause. I don't know how many people here have heard the word menopause. Okay, just like some shy hands are coming up. Yeah, all of us have heard menopause, right? So menopause is essentially a, hormonal change that women undergo. And now there's a large hunger for understanding what is this process of pre and post and during menopause, which becomes essentially a gray area for women where they're voraciously looking for information, but the community is not standing up out of the shyness in the room. So what did we do? We created India's first AI-based companion for women in midlife and menopause. You go on to gayatri.com and you start chatting with this bot. This bot is not trained on Google and GPT. It's trained on real women in India with their real experiences and real doctors and real feedback. So you're essentially speaking to somebody who's making you comfortable without making you feel judged. So that's point one. Point two is that we've created now more than 20 events around the country called Fabulous Over 40 for women to come and meet. Because this is I went through it, it's going to be okay. That sort of a conversation. So there is a physical touch point. So when we do AI plus the physical touch point, and then we say you've got the solution, go out there and either do a coaching program or get yourself a product on the platform. They don't feel like they started a journey and then they were left alone and, halfway. I think with communities, what's happening is you start out thinking that this is going to be shared issues, shared stories, but very soon communities of women are looking for shared solutions. And I think that was the missing gap all this while. So we've started focusing on that because with She the People back in 2015, when we started just a community or a content space, we didn't have to find a solution at that point because there was like, oh my God, the community was the solution. Today, it's community, storytelling, and the actual act of saying, okay, I want to buy something, I want to get something that closes the loop for me.
Yeah, I think the physical touch point, getting people together in a room, I think you also mentioned it, building with your consumers, very important, and shifts that I think sort of entrepreneurs can make, which legacy brands maybe have a machinery to get there, so it's faster, it's quicker, it's more nimble. Siddha, I have to ask with Bombay, because it has just such a interesting tone of voice, and with Shelly, we talked about sort of comfort and building that piece out. In your case, you're touching upon themes that, let's say it's a bold voice in the spectrum of voices. And how do you balance being steeped into culture, being a bit provocative, but yet balancing reassurance and trust with the consumer? Because there's so many views on what is too bold for consumers of today.
It's an amazing question, and we deal with this at an everyday level. So for context, Bombay is a hair removal, hair expression brand. And the thesis of why we started Bombay was that women are born shame-free. So, but over time, over years, when you ask women, the first instance where they were made aware of their body, it's as early as 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old. And that's the journey that women, the burden that they carry with. And so they have to unlearn this shame. So there's a difference between shame free and shameless. So that is the difference that we straddle with. So when you say if it's bold or provocative, if it is truly the way a woman's body hair is, for example, we will have even advertising of full bikini hair in all its glory, then getting removed, etc. Because the choice is yours. Women don't remove hair like this. Women don't stand like this. So there's a realness to what we do. And so if it is provocative, so be it. But one part of result showing is also making the process feel very natural, making the fact that this is your body, your hair, whatever it is you want to do with is ultimately yours. And in this process, if we are able to slowly make you unlearn the shame through products that are pain free, then you would understand that beauty is not equal to pain. Because the problem with especially hair removal is it hits around the same time as puberty. So the same burden of period, body image, and the way even in a parlor it's reinforced that pain to hoga hi na, matlab kaise fir अच्छे कैसे दिखोगे. So we just want to remove that. So that's the journey. And so the way the team operates is we have to be consumer first, culture coded, and hair expression. So these are the three buckets around which the entire brand is built. So hair expression means hair in all its glory, the way a consumer of today operates and lives with. She can, let's say, one day choose to make her underarm hair purple, but choose to decide to shave her face off, and it's okay. So I think a lot of it just comes from having even people in the team who are living that journey. So yeah, that's pretty much
I
it.
love unlearn the shame. I feel like that's a hashtag you should own if you don't already.
So
But
it's like Born Besharam,
yeah.
BAESHARM. So that's the brand tag also.
Amazing. Swati, I'm going to bring you here because you hear from brands all the time. And you know, the words narrative, the words community, they come up a lot in conversations now when brands are meeting investors. I'd love to know from your perspective, what makes that more than just being part of the pitch? Like, what are the signs or signals you look for to see how that's authentic and defensible for a brand?
Yeah, I think very interesting. I think when I was hearing everybody speak, and like a lot of pitches have the word of community, a lot of AI in all the founders I meet. It's like saying legacy brands would talk about distribution as a moat. Now the new age brands talk about community as the moat, right? So it is somewhere overdone, I would say, and I would be completely contra over here with all the panelists. But the fact is that and I think Siddha was mentioning that, right? That a lot of founders try to be the brand, or at least a face of the brand when they start. But I think what is very important from our perspective, and when we see pitches which are brilliant today because AI is perfecting everything we see today, is really about what are they building? Are they building a business which will last the next 10, 15 years and not building on a trend which is for the short term, right? Second, I think, Sixth Sense has been built on the ethos that brands will not last forever. They will get disrupted. And so in that journey of the first 10, 15 years, when you're building a community, you're building a brand, I think what's very important is that the consumer is at the center of all of this, right? So while the founder might have a very strong view on building a female-led brand like in Bombay, and Shantanu is frankly, Bombay Shaving, the epitome of storytelling we say in our portfolio, right? But if Shantanu was not building, or if he was taking on Gillette for razors, probably BSC would not be where they are today. He is building for the 16 to 20-year-old person or the man who's actually not using shavers, but using trimmers. So what the point is to say is that can brands build for the consumer needs while also talking about it from a narrative or a storytelling, right? And community, to my mind, also has to be built keeping the first 2% of the audience in mind. Somewhere you mentioned that there's a lot of feedback coming. And I think brands get distracted because they start with something and then they, somewhere lose themselves in the journey. So to really be very, very relevant for the initial audience you're building for and then go deeper, I think is very, very essential for a new age brand.
Yeah, please.
You know, I just wanted to add, and I love the point that she alludes to when it comes to both community and also this excessive feedback. One of the things that tends to happen with social first or, digital first brands, because that's really where discovery happens, you take every feedback like it's your responsibility to fix everything. But eventually, if you know what your audience is, what the white space of your brand's, goal is, I think one has to really stay true to that. And this longevity of the brand or business both will perhaps come if you're very clear that you're building it vertically deep rather than horizontally shallow and pleasing every single kind of customer. I mean, in menopause, pleasing a 40 plus woman is hard as hell. And it's not just in terms of what they consume, but what they'll believe in and then what they'll buy again, as Sunny was mentioning, the repeat power. So I think there's a lot out there to learn when it comes to taking feedback and sometimes unlearn a lot of what we've been suggested as is the key to scale, so to speak.
Yeah,
But
please.
I do want to add, I think, a nuance to what you said, Swati, because I completely agree. And, when you're building a generational brand, you think very differently from when you're building something that you're just like building for the next 4 or 5 years to sell, right? I agree with you. But there is something extremely powerful, I think, especially in the 0 to 1's journey about being extremely close to your consumer. Again, not mistaking this faster horse narrative, but really understanding their unmet needs. And to do that, I think being very clear, who do you want to be and how much do you want to be for them? Like a very, very defined ICP. So for instance, at EDT, I'll give you 2 examples just as context. One is we said we are for the premium customer. We're not for a mass market commodity play in our category, right? So if you look at appliances, fundamentally that's the space we play. We're looking at a premium play. And we had a lot of people saying, can you reduce your prices? Can you do discounts? We said no. So in fact, we increased prices after we saw the demand in the first 2 weeks. We increased our prices from 9,999 to 11,999, which for our first product, the air fryer, is unprecedented because if you look at the largest player on the market, their premium product is priced as 9,999. That was one. The second thing, as any good D2C founder and anybody who's played the marketplace game did, we obviously went and talked to marketplace category heads and said, hey, we're planning to launch a glass air fryer. What are your feedbacks? And they said it'll never work in India. But then the feedback we were getting and the insight or the direction our consumer conversations were taking us to was that we want a safer option because the ICP, the premium ICP we were going after, who was aspiring to an air fryer, was also health conscious and safety conscious. So the dissonance between, something that's Teflon coated and non-stick coated being in their lives versus they wanted a safer solution. And that to us, the answer was glass, to us as a team. So we engineered on the materials engineering side a glass solution. And then that became obviously a bestseller on marketplaces as well. So I think there is something to be said about, at certain stages in your journey to be really having your ears on the ground and be it community, be it customer insight, whatever it might be, it is extremely important. You get those counterintuitive insights from those conversations or those signals.
Yeah, no, very true. I wish I had a little pen and paper, keep taking notes as we have this chat. Sunny, I want to ask you that, beauty as a category, there's so much language of sort of self-expression and confidence. And I've seen that change from the days that I worked with a brand like Lakme, which was maybe 10 years ago. I'd love to know your view on sort of what you're hearing and seeing from your consumers on the self-expression, confidence curves of beauty women consumers today.
Well, I do believe that we're in a trend now where we want to see healthy, beautiful, glowing skin, and makeup just complements who you are. And, at Starstruck, I always tell all the girls, I want them to look beautiful, but I want them to look like them. And we've done different workshops where we've brought in women who wear makeup all the time. And then we have some women that say, I don't wear makeup. I don't want to wear any of these things. And I tell the makeup artist, I say, you start minimal, make her feel good, make her feel beautiful, and that beauty within will always shine. And it's always exciting when you get people to convert saying, no, I don't wear this and I don't wear that. And they come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I love your blush sticks. They're so easy. I go, it's just like my mom when she used to put her lipstick here, here, and then just rub it in. And I feel like when you can create products for, everyone out there and not just for the Instagram makeup look, then, you're getting somewhere.
Yeah, no, I think I'm definitely guilty of using a lipstick in one too many places on my face. And, we were having this chat about how the onus is on the brand to almost make it simple and educate the consumer, which I think is a big shift, because I've bought many a complicated device or product and thought I would rely on the good ages of YouTube to learn how to use it. But I feel like brands that are leading the education job, whether it's on safety, whether it's on language, whether it's on, thinking about makeup or hair removal in different ways, or hair expression, I'd like to call it. I think it's a very interesting shift. Swati, I want to get you in to ask, when do you see this narrative of a brand or the community of a brand translating into something that's business tangible? And I believe this is all extremely important. I believe that businesses require this to get where they are, but I'd love to hear an investor POV.
No, I think absolutely. I think all of whatever we've been speaking, I think is very, very important. Like, I think what Naya mentioned about the whole listening to the community and really the feedback loop. But I think as an investor, for us, we are there for the 5-7 years. And there is a that time frame where we really need the business to scale and somewhere getting to profitability, right? So I think as an investor, maybe 2-3 things which really matter to us is to see that at what stage does the brand start demanding lower CACs, right? I think that to me is like the golden, rule to say that if tomorrow, and I think Naya mentioned it, right? That if a brand reduce discounting, that is amazing. Like, that's something which I think every brand should actually try to get to, because then you're creating a consumer pull and you're not really pushing the brand out and just by saying a story and kind of getting consumers to buy. The second most important thing to us as an investor would be the longevity of a consumer, right? Which is the lifetime value of a consumer. So one is if you're able to get consumers in, which is not going to be prohibitive and which means that your business can be sustainable, then how do you ensure that the consumer keeps coming back? They're either coming back because it's the same consumer repeating, or either, like there's a brand we've invested in called Jiva, right? Where it's a silver jewelry brand. And I remember when we invested, we said this is the most non-sticky category. No consumer is going to come back to the platform. And we are really surprised seeing that how Jiva is bringing back consumers at extremely lower CACs. So I think that combination, of a lower CAC and a high LTV, it really, really does it for the brand. And that's the golden rule, I would say.
Yeah. And it's come up maybe briefly in this chat because all of you've talked about engaging in some way physically with the consumer. And so much of the narrative conversation ends up being an online one, right? I think that's the first port of call that most brands end up spending on. It's where you build your voice. But how are you guys engaging offline? And I want to open it up to the group. How are you thinking about that? Because at places like this very much, some of you will have your consumers. There are sort of maybe offline events that you're engaging with to learn from your consumer, whether you're organizing them or having your brand show up there. So maybe broadly put, in the world that's seeming to crave that a little bit more than they used to, how do you guys think about offline and building narrative with your consumers there?
Cool. Okay, I'll start with that one. So we are, again, like I said, for those of you who joined late, we are building India's first midlife and menopause stack for women, information and products. Now, what happens in something like this is that when you create an offline event, which we do, last year we did about 100 events, and all of these, the word event could be all kinds of sizes that go from 30 to 300, or to the menopause summit we did in Bombay, which had 900 people. Now, why is this important? Because people want to listen to experts. I work in a space where I'm the founder, but I am not the expert. There is an expert who would be from the medical space or a nutrition space and so on. What I found really fascinating is, and I learned this on the job, that it appears to be an issue of a doctor, but it's not. Which is why today I see our brand having a 15-year cycle with the consumer, because essentially you need to manage this life stage and you cannot have a pill for it. And that makes it supremely challenging yet exciting, because the LTV story kicks in exactly here. When people come buy products, they're buying it for maintenance. They're not buying it to fill a cavity. And that makes one journey of this LTV attractive. But the journey that gets harder is, how do you make everyone aware along this journey so that they embrace the changes that come with it? Because over a period of 10 years, a woman will change several times. She's not going to just, it's not about choosing the color of a lipstick. It's about making a choice of what's going into her system and how her system is changing. So I think physical touch points are extremely crucial in today's world, and even more so post-COVID, because scrolling activity is just that right now. There's a lot of mindless scrolling. They are done with the, what's the word? The hook. The hook, right? We all founders are constantly finding whether the ads are delivering the hook. They're like, they know that these are games. Consumers know that these are games. So for the consumer to come back is the hardest one. And if we can manage to bring them back without paying quite a bit, is the other one. And I think it's deeply linked to making those offline connections with women and or with consumers.
Yeah, no. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one?
Sure. So at Starstruck, something that we do with each one of our distributors, and we have many distributors across the globe. I can give you one example. Malaysia is one of them, where the women, before they walk into any temple, mosque, they have to take off all their makeup. And one of the things that we've done is we've actually partnered, downstairs is their booth, All Mask, where we make these little mini dispensers of makeup remover wipes, and they take it off, and it's our Starstruck wipe, and then we put it in into the different dispensers. So that's just one example where we work with offline, like you said, with each distributor based on that country's needs, based on their wants, and we customize all the makeup towards what they want. And we always send huge shipments of all the makeup that all the women in the office can try on, and they can give us their feedbacks. Or it goes to the wives of, the gentlemen that work in there, in the offices, where we can get general feedback of like what our consumer wants, what that country wants, what that community wants. And because it's my husband and I at Starstruck, we're able to cater to each one of these clients. So it's really, really nice.
Can I go next? So, at ADD, we started with a very, with a bit of a crazy mission and vision, rather, which was, can we, as, this generation of entrepreneurs, build globally defining brands from India for the world? And the fact that we're launching EDT first in India is actually a very strategic step, to put it very bluntly, because we believe that India's premium audience is actually highly demanding, extremely diverse, and therefore if we can meet their needs, we can pretty much win anywhere in the world, right? My team is a global team. So we have folks in the US, in India, in China, but the Indian team actually ends up spending a lot of time, not as much as they should, I believe, but in taking our community, the edit, and they themselves going and discovering centers of design and manufacturing excellence in India. So to give you a sense, one really cool offline experience we did, or event we did, was actually with the Mercedes factory near Pune, where we did a tour of the Mercedes full factory. We got access because the CEO, Santosh, was very kind, and he himself actually showed us the whole premise. But we understood how, in their context, SKD works, or in their context where engineering gets hosted, where where the engine and the chassis come together. So to really understand excellence, design and manufacturing excellence from a different perspective is one example of the events that or the catch-ups that we do as a company. So I think that's the other nuance I just want to bring, because as founders and as teams, many times we might be with our heads in the ground. It's really wonderful to use these sort of learning opportunities with our community to just discover different ways in which you can build.
So maybe I'll just come in here, right? So as in, when we see many of our brands, frankly, digital is the way from a longevity, stickiness, retention. I would frankly bet on digital. But I think offline is a very interesting, brings an interesting aspect. It's like, what back in the day sampling would do when you would walk into a store and say, why don't you try this on, right? So I think offline actually gives you the opportunity to increase penetration. Now, offline could happen in a community event. It could happen at a Mercedes, whatever Naya was mentioning when they went for a tour. It's really about how do you get the right set of audience in a framework where they're willing to listen to you, and how many of them you're able to convert. But can offline be something which as a business is sustainable to keep building out and scaling? Probably not, right? It's very, very tough. So I think digital far superior in all of these aspects to really build retention. But offline, yeah, is very critical for penetration is what I would think.
Yeah, I think we're kind of looking so far, at least what I got was that we're focused on the community connection part because we don't, for example, have an offline arm at all. We only make these initiatives in order to increase awareness and do the testing that you're saying. You have a bunch of products, you got people getting information, and also a reaffirmation of what seems to be a nebulous area in their head. So they want to hear, because a lot of the times in health as a whole, validation of what symptoms are is the first step towards seeking the change that you want to see. So I think that's really an interesting bridge that people in the healthcare space or the women's health or preventive health space see.
I would just like to add, I agree with Swati. So the role of the product and the offline interface has to be very clear. For example, if my core consumer is a 15, like the first time hair remover, then what is the best interesting way I can engage with the consumer and make them experience a brand is one way of looking at an objective. If the objective is scale, then penetration, and then being parts of storefronts where that purchase happens the most. For example, we have an under 100 rupees razor, which is across 30,000 stores in India. The objective of that is just pure penetration and, making the product go into the household. But we also have these airport kiosks where there's a lot of footfall, and the job of that kiosk is to be at prime real estate, get eyeballs, and sometimes make the consumer experience the brand in all its glory. So I think, and it's also the stage of life of the brand. If you go offline too early, I think you're just diversifying resources. But over time, like let's say there's a 20,000 rupees product, there will be a consumer who would ask, hey, where can I touch and feel this product? So I think as a combination of product plus journey plus consumer, like for example, college campuses, we really want to go into. How we go into it in a meaningful way is a question. But I think that holy trinity is what drives offline decisions. That works at least.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's so many elements. Like I'm sure for everyone in the audience, there's so much to glean in the different ways to go about scaling the brand, what to focus on at which juncture. And, before I open it up to the audience, I have to ask, just because we're all women on a panel, what's a stereotype maybe about either women consumers or women founders that you're kind of just done with?
I like the way everyone's looking at me. I think the stereotype that I'm done with is that women equals consumer. I think there are different women looking for different things, and within that space of women or the universe of women now, there are very specific categorization of the kind of female consumers you can build brands for. And I think whether it was back in the day for She the People or me, I just can't understand why people think one type of woman is one type of, sort of a homogenous term for a certain type of consumer. Today, a large number of women don't buy beauty, they buy skin. There are a large number of women who buy fast fashion, but a large number of women who just don't buy fast fashion. Similarly, I think women, for us, are a space like we've defined the female above 40 as our space to work on. Very clear, no confusion. If she's above 40, this is the space she needs to be when it comes to nutrition and beauty. So that's where we are. So I think one stereotype is not to put them all in one basket, for me.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, interesting. I think, as a fund, Sixth Sense, in finance, you don't see many women. More so less in private equity and venture capital. Sixth Sense is a fund where we are more than 50% women in the leadership team, right? And we keep getting asked that, are you doing this because you think it's easier to raise funds? Clearly not. We hopefully have chosen the right and the most meritorious women. But I think the other stereotype, which keeps coming to us is how many women founders have you backed? And I think I want to just put that at rest and say we've backed the best founders. And they happen to be women, right? So I think, the whole worldview which we're looking at right now is that if 50% of the consumers are women, if there is a woman founder, the woman founder is actually being more cognizant of what is out there, what are the requirements out there, what are the demand pieces which they may be missing earlier. And all the founders, and incidentally, more than 40% of our businesses are women-led founders, but not because they were just started by women, but because they were the best out there, actually challenging that category and building for that category, right? So I think, as investors, we want to back the best, and they may be women, right?
Did any of you watch Devil Wears Prada 2?
Who's getting the tickets, yeah?
Oh, well, we went yesterday.
So
And
no
there
one in
was-
the audience has watched this. I'm
Nobody's
curious because
watched it.
either they're not putting up their hands or they have been hard
Okay,
at work.
please watch it.
One person.
But, okay, so I think there was a line that Meryl Streep says, which just is literally what is me, which is, I love to work. And I can't explain it, but it's something that my mom's been a very successful working woman, if you will. My sister is too. I mean, and we've worked very, very hard all our lives. We love building. We love working. We love building our teams. We love seeing our products in people's homes. Yeah, there's a certain joy. And I think the biggest stereotype I face, especially I think after, being 10 years in the ecosystem or, sort of having a couple of wins or whatever under my belt is that why do you work? Why do you need to work? And I don't have an answer to give people, but I think Meryl Streep just said it. She's like, I love to work. I love to build. And, eventually, like the one thing I want to talk about, not just men and women, but I think all of us is that we have one life. And I think the privilege and the joy of being an entrepreneur is that you leave something behind, right? Not many jobs give you that in many ways. I think being an entrepreneur gives you that. You build something from scratch that is something you can call your own that you've left behind. So I think that's just a broader stereotype I just wanted to do away with and never have any of us asked again that why do you work?
I don't listen to any of the nonsense that goes on around me. I just put my head down, keep working, and that's it. I don't think that, and like you said, we should be listening to any of that nonsense. I think when you have a good team, good people around you, you keep working. If your business is not serving you anymore, then make a right, left turn and move on to something else. So that's it.
I agree with Sunny. Actually, at my day-to-day workplace, I don't feel this at all. In fact, on Thursday, we had at 11 a.m. a fashion show in between a work day with all the people who worked on a particular product. So that's the way the inner world is. But sometimes, like you said, the outer world is a bit incoherent. I think the one thing that I struggle a little with is that there's an expectation of how a founder should look like, sound like. And I think that is a little cognitive bias that over time I think people will unlearn. And hopefully then over time we don't have to treat women founders as women founders. We just treat them as founders who happen to be women. And I think that will be it should be an afterthought. It should not be an adjective associated with us first. And the work should be the first thing that, comes to mind.
Yeah, I also want to come to the fashion show in your office. So I'm just recording that for good measure. I think just before I open it up to the audience, I'd love to ask if any of you have a question for each other that you've been dying to ask and I haven't covered. Anything for the panel from each of you? Otherwise, I'll open it up to the group. Okay, great. Opening it up for questions now, can I just request that you tell me who you're addressing the question to? And if it can be a question and less of an observation, that's great. So anyone who wants to jump in? Okay, let's go with you.
Thank you so much for your insights. My question is for Naya and Swati. So I'm trying to build a global brand in the instant noodle space. It's going to be launching in a couple of months. I feel like if you go to, shops in New York, London, Australia, you don't really see any instant noodles from India represented, which is quite interesting as we're the third largest consumer of instant noodles worldwide and people love Indian flavors. So the brand that I'm creating is really going to stand out in terms of packaging, quality, even the flavors. My question is actually around fundraising. So I'm going to start fundraising next month. And my I've got a little bit of trepidation around saying I want to build a global brand because I feel that when I put forward my 5-year plan and show that, I want to go to these sort of countries the next 5 years, investors going to look at it like, wow, I'm going to get diluted. She's going to need a lot of money. So how do I frame this and how best do I present it to investors in a way that they really see the opportunity rather than the cost to them?
I just want to make sure I heard instant noodles, right? You mentioned,
Yes.
yeah, okay,
Yes.
perfect. Great. So I think, thanks for your question. Fundraising is hard. Let me just start with that. But I think what is very important is that, in this whole space of, say, instant noodles, which you're like looking to really start, a business in, one is, do you have a very strong differentiator to start with? Because, you're taking on incumbents, right? Like today, a Maggie noodles, which is existing. So what is it what do you want to stand for as a brand? And who is the consumer set you want to appeal to? Is it a healthier noodle or is it just purely taste? Because mind you, food as a category is the toughest consumer category, right? Because it's very subjective. You might like the taste, I might not like the taste, right? So we have to be very sure of the category or the target consumer you're building for, and also the distribution you want to thereby get to the consumer. But I think from a fundraise perspective, you did mention aspirations of being global. What is important, I think, is to first create the niche, which could be into an Indian consumer, right? What an investor likes to believe or see is validation. To say that maybe there are about 100,000 people who actually want to buy into this product, right? And that first initial product market fit, I think, is enough validation for them to then believe that you have the execution capability to go global. But I think when you're talking for fundraising, it's important to start small, build the market for the market where you are in today, take that validation to an investor, and then have the visibility to show why it would be relevant in another market out of India, right? I think that's very, very important. So be very clear when you start off on the product, what is the differentiation, who's your TG, and when you go to the investor, have those deliverables in front of you for them to believe, and also have variables which they can actually, test you on to say, oh, you said this, have you done this? I think that's very critical.
I mean, you heard it from the investor herself. So I'll just add like a little bit of my experience. I think Swati said it brilliantly. So when I started EDT, I was doing something similar, and I'm still doing something similar, which is how do you build a global brand in the daily devices that power our lives from India for the world, right? But here is where I kind of nuanced it. One was, bluntly, even in my choice of cap table, right? I got in not just institutional capital, and that is, I think, is a journey you get to, and we'll talk a little bit about that offline. But also, there's a bunch of angels who have built consumer businesses globally. So for instance, on my cap table, I have Bala, who runs Vadam. I have Ultra Human. I have a bunch of these founders from India who have built global brands. So for them, it's not like this is not feasible. In fact, it is very much a reality and actually where their gross margins sit, right? So I think that is one sort of strategic piece that you could play to. Think about founder operators who are willing to be angels in your company, and that gives also your company a little bit more of a shot at success if you haven't built a global brand before. The second thing that I think Swati said is beautifully is that I am of the firm belief that in India, there is a certain global citizen which sits in that premium audience of India. And therefore, when I'm building EDT products, the good thing is I can program based on the nuance of the country I'm serving. So similarly, in case you can test with that audience, see the reception, fine tune, because this is home territory, you can move very agile, right? And then when you see insane product market fit, fundraising also happens in stages, right? So you raise a certain amount for proving this. The next phase could be for doing a pilot in X country and so on and so forth. So I think, we have that big vision. We don't deviate from it, but there are steps that we need to maybe think about creating for ourselves.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? I think there were two hands in the row behind. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Meenal Sharma. I'm co-founder Swastha Life. We deal in Ayurvedic products. So basically, we started with exporting gummies, Shilajit, turmeric, and ashwagandha. And currently, we are developing more gummies. In fact, I was hearing you, Shaili. And there is a lot, we are developing a gummy only in Ayurvedic, no nutraceutical, for hormonal balance with Shatavari and Muleti, plus vitamin C, Amla gummies for hair, nail and skin. We're all Ayurvedic, and sleep gummies. So my question to Shaili is, we are still in development stage. It's going to be 2 to 3 months for coming up with the hormonal gummies. Is there a way we can collab, or how do I get this message out to women 40 plus? Because what happens, we are just starting and it becomes a difficult scenario, because we have gummies for an 18-year-old to a 50-year-old, and segmenting them becomes how much to spend. As a bootstrap company, it's a, so collab works. And yes, we are doing few events in health and wellness space, so the consumers can taste our gummies and see the difference and compare it to the market.
I'll just separate the PR part from your business question. I think the business question is a really valid one. One as to where do you prioritize what you're doing. And I think essentially, if you're creating a brand, that prioritization is very important. But if you're envisaging yourself as a business that wants to do the bulk path of becoming the supplier, then it's a completely different business. As a brand, it's extremely important. I think in various ways, all the folks on the table here have mentioned this. Focus of your audience is the number one thing. I know this for a fact that I had to sit 2 years ago and decide, am I building for the 20-year-old woman with PCOS, or the woman at 40 who still has PCOS and who's struggling with it because now it's PCOS plus midlife plus menopause? And I think that is perhaps something you should do before you spend even 1 rupee on marketing or partnering with anyone, because focus and verticalization goes a long way in the growth story. I think most people, as founders, you want to see this. As investors, you'll find them asking you this. What is your hero story? And if you can't find your hero story, you're essentially horizontally thinning yourself rather than going in that vertical depth that I was saying. Leave everything aside, find the 2 things that you want to run with, and then run with them, would be my piece of advice for a founder who's bootstrapped. But even when you get investor money, I would still say that's the right approach.
Thank you.
I think there's someone with the mic already. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, hi. My question is to Sunny and Siddha. So I've been noticing lately that especially in beauty and personal care, what the consumer wants or what the audience wants is moving more from aspirational to the brand being more relatable in a sense. And how have you noticed this in your communities, and how is it that you represent these values? Is there a balance between trying to be visual but also real at the same time? Thank you.
So I always say that my consumer is not necessarily someone from Bollywood or an Instagram model. My consumer is you. My consumer is every woman in this room who's working hard all day and on their feet all day, taking care of kids, going to the office. Maybe she's at home taking care of the house. That's my consumer. And I love those women. And if I can give them a product that lasts a long time and makes them feel good, then that's amazing. Of course, we have to always compete with, everyone on Instagram or any social media. But I think that for myself, the reason that I wanted to create this was I wanted to create a high quality product with great formulas for anyone. Because when I was a little girl, I went and I bought that 4-pack of eyeshadow and it didn't even stick on my face, and I had saved up all my money to buy it and it didn't work. And I think that's where Starstruck comes from, is the idea that I meet so many young people out there, so many moms, so many people that go to an office, whatever their job is, and they're always saying, I don't know what to buy. I don't know what's great. I don't know, where do I spend my money? Because there's a lot of people out there that don't have, they don't want to spend $50 on a compact. So I think that it's important that we cater to that market of glamour, but also Starstruck definitely wants great formulas and cater to anyone that wants to wear it.
Your name, sorry?
My name is Rohini.
Mohini.
Rohini.
Rohini. So that's a great question, and that's something we struggle with a lot because in the field of hair expression, we have hair removal and hair styling. Now, we have decided as a brand to not airbrush our images, but unfortunately, hairstyling without airbrushing, no matter what you do, it doesn't look like it has to look. People have this bias of a Pantene ad hair, and that evokes purchase, right? So you're absolutely right in this dichotomy of trying to figure out balance of relatability, because that's a trend, right? Someone who looks like me, there's a whole rooted in India, rightly so phenomenon. So we have to not because it's cool, but because that's how real brands are built. So we do that a lot in hair removal. But for example, in hairstyling, there are times when we use actual images, it just doesn't work. So that's the sad part, and that's the line where we have to figure out, okay, this works great in some categories, this might need a little bit of nuance in another. But the easy part, the question should always then be, who is my core consumer, and try to define her as sharply as you can. And then if it is solves, so for me, probably my core consumer is you. So if it meets what Rohini's idea of hair expression is, then my job is done. It might not align with everyone else, but I need Rohini to understand what my brand stands for.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one last question. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Arpita. I'm from HealthQ Life Sciences. I have a question for Swati. So Swati, even I am in the same space of D2C skincare brand, which is so saturated, but still, every day there's this new brand which is coming up. And brands over the past few years, they have commoditized, key actives. Everyone knows niacinamide, alpha-arbutin, etc., etc. And brands have, I think they have overtaught consumers, but without trust. And there's too much market dependency in this category. The main problem is contract manufacturers. So nobody has, very few brands have their own have their own manufacturing. I think 90% are dependent on contract manufacturers. So what do you feel? What is the one reason why my brand still should exist in the market?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. And, you mentioned somewhere that these actives and the whole narrative around what they're using as an ingredient, especially in personal care, has somewhere got commoditized, right? So I think first, every business to me will get commoditized over time if you're not able to find that brand salience, which is why I think the question was really pointed to, because, in India specifically, entrepreneurship is such that today, if Naya has an idea, tomorrow I'm going to execute that, right? And that's how India is. And thereby, especially in personal care, where the entry barriers are very low, because you have supply available, more than 95% brands are actually being built in the same factory, right? So the differentiation or the brand here is really going to come from what you think you want to stand for. Right? For instance, it's a very, very crowded space. It's the most non-sticky consumer category, right? Because you have gross margins of 70-80%, which people are very easily launching brands and maybe throwing money to acquire consumers. But after a while, the consumer is going off because the consumer is experimenting. So I think what is important is for you to understand that what is your playbook, right? Is it that you want to stand for ingredients and something which you asked for? If that's not what you want to stand for, that's hygiene. So don't focus on that. Focus on something which you believe will appeal to a consumer and do it at a smaller subset. So don't try to be a cosmetic brand which everybody's going to use. Maybe be that one eyeshadow brand which people want to know you for. First, get to that stage and then build the other products. So know what your initial go-to market is going to be, because you need to be identified for a niche first to even be known. Like, I'll give you an example. There was a footwear brand. Footwear is a very commoditized category. We bet on this brand called Neiman's. They started as a sustainable footwear brand, right? Sustainability is not scalable in India. Every consumer is not going to care about sustainability. But they started with that as their go-to. They got the initial consumers to believe on what sustainability is. And now the brand has scaled up to become sustainability first. They may not be 100% sustainable. But what was important is that they made the eyeballs come to them for a messaging they were starting with, right? So have that messaging very, very clear. And everything from a product, everything is going to get copied, more so in India. So that has to become the bet over time when you get known for a brand. But if you think your initial 0 to 10 journey is going to be only on product, I think it's going to be a bit tough.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I think we're at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, apologies that you won't get to raise them here, but perhaps as people go offline.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, what a power-packed session. I think our entire panelist on stage requires a huge round of applause. Come on, give it up for them, please. We have a small token of appreciation for each of our panelists, requesting Hazel Menezes from CMPL Expo to please come on stage and do the honors. Firstly, to our moderator, Karina. And ladies and gentlemen, you really know what to do. Come on, please put your hands together. To Miss Sunny Leone. I can't hear the applause. Miss Naya Sagi. Miss Swati Mehra. Miss Siddha Jain. Come on, everyone. Miss Shaili Chopra. And we're going to mark this moment with a group photograph, please. So can I have all panelists to come ahead? Yes, if you can, please. I must say, indeed, a very thought-provoking session. There is lots to take back and reflect from this session. Thank you so much.